Welcome to the Sexient Beings sessions. I'm Alix Pruett, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach and reality guide. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to transform their old patterns, pain, and beliefs so they can create thriving relationships that are deeply connected, playful, and fulfilling within themselves and with others. Today, I'm joined by the phenomenal Rachelrose. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Rachelrose, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you for a warm welcome. I am Rachelrose, and I am a psychologist and life coach, and I help women overcome and reinvent themselves after trauma or having PTSD so that they can move on with their lives in peace.
Beautiful. Today, our topic is trauma triggers, and I'm going to let you go ahead and give this more of the introduction since it was a topic that you picked out.
Yeah, it is. The reason I picked this out was because it's been coming up a lot in my conversations with my clients. Um, Mostly around the disbelief, in a sense, um, in what actually trauma or triggers them. As it's all, it seems common for them to apologize for it as if it's nonsense.
Hmm.
And I wanted to talk about it because trauma triggers can come from anywhere, anything, high, low, in between. There's no like, oh, I should only be traumatized by like a car backfiring because it sounded like a, gun.
Hmm.
It could be hearing the Baby Shark song on the radio.
Yeah.
Like there's no, one way for a trauma trigger. And I wanted to talk about it because of a lot of the shame I've been seeing in my clients and other people around it. And I've felt it in myself over the years in having specific trauma triggers and also not knowing that you have a trauma trigger and not knowing that the song Baby Shark is a trauma trigger and going into a triggered state and not exactly knowing what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and I think the importance here is defining that trauma is subjective. It is not the
Mm,
objective experience of the event that happened.
exactly.
It is how it impacted the individual system. So,
Hmm.
where somebody having a partner cheat on them may not be traumatizing at all, and it's a easy nope, like move on. They're
Hmm.
not carrying anything for emotional wounding around that. It's not continuing to impact their system. There's another person who could go through the exact same thing, and it is a catastrophic event in
Yeah.
their system,
Yeah.
right? It's bringing up all these old narratives about what their value is, how attractive they are, the quality of a partner they are, if they're worthy of love, if they're enough, if they're too much. It can bring up so many slews of things. And relationships just on their own, whether that's with partners or coworkers, family members, can definitely bring up so many of those triggers on nuanced
Mhm.
levels.
Yeah.
And in that, it can be confusing because you can recognize where, yes, you've had this experience in the past, you thought you moved through it,
Hmm.
right? But
Hmm.
there's still some resonance of it, something in your system that doesn't feel safe when it starts seeing the little cues.
Yeah.
And to me, it's recognizing, okay, like, am I actually safe in this moment? Or is there something here that needs to be shifted so I feel more safe? And generally, for me, it's a combination.
Hmm. Yeah. Same here.
And
But
that's, I know you had mentioned when we had talked about it before, wanting to talk about trauma triggers and especially around yelling. So I wasn't sure what was there for you.
yeah. Um, That's so there's trauma triggers and what triggers you, but then there's also what happens to you after you've been triggered.
Mhm,
And what's been coming up a lot in the past couple of weeks for me is the trauma triggering uh, yelling to a point where you can't shut it off. And
mhm.
doesn't have to specifically yelling. It could be crying, um, but it's usually around a fixed mindset because of the survival mode kicking in.
Okay, and when you say fixed mindset, like, could you define that a little bit just for anyone
Sure.
listening?
The way that I'm describing it in this instance is, it's kind of like there is just a wall been put up
Mhm,
around. I'd like to view it on all sides. There's no way outside of the present feeling after that trigger moment. So calming down, having someone tell you to calm down will probably, make it worse, which
mhm,
commonly happens when a trigger moment happens. Um, but understanding that when a trigger moment happens, it's not really a bendable reaction, which is what I mean by uh, fixed mindset.
mhm,
You can't bend it at all, or it'll break. This is taught, and this is the way it's going to happen in our minds.
mhm.
That's not a great description of what a fixed mindset is in general, but that's what I mean in this specific instance.
Well, I'd say, at least from what you're describing, what's coming to me is, um, kind of the way we end up applying different lenses or filters to our personal experience. And when we're in a fixed mindset, we're only seeing a story in one way,
Yes, yeah.
right? But when we have more of an open perspective about what those things can be, then you can change the lens from a red tint to a blue tint to a green tint. You can see all the different combinations of what that can
Mhm,
be, and that there's other ways that can be playing out
mhm,
versus it only meaning this one very rigid thing.
mhm. Yeah, no, that's a perfect example of what I mean, or
Mhm,
explanation, definitely. And a lot of the reason why a response to a trigger or trauma trigger could be aggression or yelling or just an exacerbated single emotion like sadness, excessive, compulsive crying, um, to even, binge eating or binge watching television, as well as anger or yelling.
mhm,
It really does come from that shame that I was talking about earlier around the trigger and also around, and it is unconscious in that moment, but around the event in the past that, or events that had developed that trigger. And it
mhm.
doesn't have to be a catastrophic, I was in a car accident when I was 9 and this is why I have this trigger. It could be some minor thing that just happened too many times that you were just like, that's the last straw.
Yeah, the way I tend to look at trauma anymore is obviously there is the bigger events, like a person was in war, right?
Mhm.
A person was brutally assaulted.
Mhm.
Like those are definitely bigger instances,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that they carry more weight necessarily
I
than
love that wording. Yeah.
the smaller instances, which a lot of the time, it's CPTSD, complex
Mhm.
PTSD,
Mhm.
where it is small instances compiled over time that give you a narrative of the world.
Yes.
right? And that can show up in many different ways, but the way I personally notice that is it's the spaces that tell me I should, shouldn't, can, can't, and
Mhm.
that I can only be like one way in that.
Mhm.
And that's where I will notice those phrases coming up in my mind, and then it's a signal to me to question that.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's I think we can get caught up a lot in the stigma, and especially the way it gets categorized in psychology, right? By the DSM manuals,
Mhm.
even by the ACEs test. Like I went through a trauma course at one point in time for trauma facilitation, and one of the workshop presenters introduced us to the ACEs test, which is a valuable test for sure
Oh, of
to
course.
help you gauge the level of bigger instances of trauma you may have experienced and start opening that perspective of what trauma can look like, because it's not just a physical assault. It can be emotional, it can be neglect,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um,
And it could be completely unintentional on, the person who you have now perceived to have inflicted it.
yeah. Well, and even big events that most people would perceive as very happy, like the birth of a child, right?
Yeah, yeah.
A wedding, like you getting married and going through this big life transition
Mhm.
can reside in your system as a trauma. It doesn't have to, and it may not for everyone, right? But it can, and that's where it is very subjective for how that
Yeah.
hangs out. Um,
A good picture for that, for anyone listening, is, a good example in my life. Um, I have a very, I have a lot of siblings, and a lot of the memories that I have of my childhood that are some of my favorite memories that I loved so much are my sister's most traumatic.
mhm,
And that's, like her remembrance of it and mine and how we reacted to the situation are completely different. But both are valid. But because I don't have the same memories, or it would be wrong of me to be like, no, I that was a happy memory for me. So why are you traumatized by it? There was nothing traumatic there. I don't feel like there was.
yeah.
That would be a fixed mindset to not see the opposition of what it was that I experienced.
Mhm. Well, that's even in my experience and in my self journey and healing journey. I actually contacted my stepsister at one point, and she lived with um, my father and stepmother like through her childhood and being raised. And I only lived there after I was in high school, at least full time.
Mhm.
But in that, I remember there being one point where I realized how emotionally unsupported I felt in that space and
Mhm.
emotionally unsafe, like unable to cry. Like my emotions were not a safe thing to
Yeah.
express, to be heard. When I did try to go forward with those things, I was usually met with what for my system was very dismissive as a response and like, oh, just go solve your own problems. Well, I was going to an adult because I had a problem I didn't know how to solve as a child, right? But I
Yeah.
remember going to her at one point in time and I just asked her, I was like, so like for you growing up, like, did you feel emotionally supported by our parents? And for her, it was an easy yes, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, I recognized even at that point that like people have different perspectives. If I hadn't, like, I probably would never ask the question. But it was interesting to notice how supported she felt and how neglected I felt in that space,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the valuable things to also notice in this is the idea of generational trauma that
Yeah.
gets passed down, because there can also be these fears in our parents or our grandparents as primary caretakers, things that are modeled
Mhm.
as traumatic events or things that are like too scary, whatever it is. And it's knowledge they're passing down, whether that's consciously or unconsciously,
Mhm.
but then that gets held in your now new body. And that's where the idea of generational healing comes in and breaking generational cycles.
Mhm.
Because I know for me that there has been some instances of molestation and rape in my family's past history. And there's definitely things that got passed down as far as a lack of safety with men
Mhm.
around that, right? Along
Yeah.
with they just want a piece of you. Like that is one of those very short blips of some sort of like conditioned messaging that I
Mhm.
got. And it's like other people aren't ever going to really love you. They just want something from you,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
And it trickles down to, because that, I like to say that generational trauma is like a silent curse,
Mhm.
silent and invisible,
Yeah.
especially if it's many, many years ago. If
Yeah.
it's one generation away, it might be pretty loud, pretty clear. But if it's, a couple generations away, and maybe you're now if feeling the effects of it, it's silent and it's almost deadly. Uh,
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be, well, well, I guess a better example or way of saying it would be, your past histories on what could be causing certain generational traumas within your family dynamic,
Mhm.
because that. In my family, there is a lot of issue um, with going out to eat. The
Mhm.
idea of spending money on ourselves,
Yeah.
as well as getting something nice. Like I always grew up, always going to Goodwills or used clothing stores or very cheap quality clothing stores 'cause they were inexpensive,
Mhm.
and that created a lot of, and that is from somewhere. I don't know what it's from, and I've talked to my parents about it. I can see more on my father's side. He grew up very poor, um, and that just kind of trickled down onto me. That shame of having to go to the what's the U.S. Army for free
The
clothes.
army surplus stores or
Yeah, Army surplus stores. Thank you. I forgot they were
well,
called.
and then there's like Salvation Army.
Salvation Army. Yeah. And so like my dad grew up with Christmases with used toys.
Mhm.
And so his response is, over time that created shame around money and the ability to keep it.
Yeah.
Versus my mom's side, which is you keep it and you never use it, not even for yourself. And both of those are two types of generational traumas around money.
Mhm. Well, and getting that very dualistic narrative
Mm-hmm.
that like continues to tell you this is something very limited, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to throw it back a little bit to these trauma triggers and what I was saying about yelling and anger is I've got those two different dynamics of my parents' generational trauma around money,
Mhm.
and then I was raised with both of them. And
Yeah.
so I have neither. I can, I've realized all of this as an adult,
Mhm.
and I've had to work through all of that and unlearn a lot of the things that they both taught me to find a happy medium. And that had created a lot of anger within me around money.
Mhm.
Not only, at first it was just with my parents, and I couldn't understand why I was so upset with them about my money.
Mhm.
And then it rolls over, and then I had a lot of traumatic experiences that associated with that trauma trigger. It didn't have to be super specific. Like I didn't, someone used me for my money or something like that. It could have been um, a group of friends wanted to go out to eat, but I wouldn't go because I can't spend money out. That's going to be way too much money.
Mhm.
And then, things like that. It's a very mild example, and I hope I'm making my point. Um, Down to my ex husband, who I had put into my head of this generational trauma money doesn't matter. Money doesn't matter. And so my ex husband came from Thailand, so it's not as rich of a country financially as America. So it was very different dynamic there. And then all of that sped up into triggers around him wanting to spend money all the time, and I couldn't. That was not something I could do.
Mhm.
And so a lot of that would turn into yelling.
Yeah.
Uh, that is a very brief example of how something so minute, one would think minute, could affect the trajectory of your life if you don't pay attention.
Well, and I think it's valuable to recognize as well that a lot of the time, the way trauma triggers will show up
Hmm.
is in the model of fight, flight, freeze, fawn,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because it is a fear and stress response
Hmm.
in the body
Hmm.
to ultimately not feeling safe on
Hmm.
some level, right? There being a lack of safety. There's a lack of safety if you go spend the money, right? Like something in the future is going to happen that like that money is not going to be there again,
Yeah. And on top of that,
right?
there's also that lack of safety of, well, what am I missing out on if I don't spend the money? So then
Yeah.
throw in that creates shame.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's so where Rachel Rose is talking about anger, right? That is very much so associated with a fight response
Hmm.
and yelling to me, especially because people tend to fight when they yell. Um, that's
Hmm.
that's in that fight response as
Hmm.
well. When you get into the flee response, that can look like somebody literally running away, right? Um, and like there is value in recognizing, oh, I'm feeling really triggered. I need to step away for 5, 10, 20 minutes, right? Or maybe even a day or more.
Hmm.
But if you can communicate back to the other person, if this involves another person, right? That, hey, this is important. I'm feeling triggered right now. I need to take a break because maybe when you yell, you say a bunch of things you don't want to say, right?
Yes.
Or that you don't mean or are epitomized as the always, never, everythings,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
When those words tend to come up in conversation, I'm like, oh, this is related to a narrative, right?
Yeah. My father used to tell me yelling is like jumping off a cliff.
Mhm.
There's no way you can take it back once you do it.
Yeah.
The effect that it has on you, the effect it has on everyone else or the environment, there's absolutely no way to take it back.
Mhm.
Trust has been breached by that dagger that you spew out of your mouth.
Yeah.
Whether you did it intentionally or not. And a lot of the time when we're trauma triggered and our fight response is kicked in, we don't mean to say the things that are coming out. It's like vomit. And
Yeah.
it's like we can't shut it off.
Yeah, and it's bringing a level of consciousness, at least in my experience with yelling.
Hmm.
It's a really good way to notice the core wounds, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And the things that have built up because usually that has gotten to a point of overwhelm, that pressure cooker that is now exploding, the
yeah,
volcano,
yeah.
because so much has built up. And that's the more you work with noticing when you feel angry, right?
Mhm.
Getting familiar with those sensations in your body, getting comfortable being uncomfortable with feeling anger, the sooner you recognize that something's feeling triggered in your system, and then you can get curious about it and see what the underlying need is.
Yes.
Because I will tell you, like, so in my experience, I would feel triggered, anger would show up in my system. I had trauma around feeling anger. So I would
Mhm.
go into dissociation
Yeah.
and not allow myself to feel the anger because I had a narrative that my anger wasn't safe. My anger was something that was scary. My anger was something that would hurt other people.
Mhm.
But in that, my anger also carried such amazing wisdom with it.
Mhm.
Like when I was actually able to finally allow myself the space to get comfortable being uncomfortable with it because it was its own trauma trigger in my system to now shut off.
Yeah.
But in that, it typically was telling me when I felt I was being asked to take on too much responsibility
Mhm.
or responsibilities that just blatantly were not mine, which I was also really good at taking on in myself for a long time. Um, Also, a really big one was that there was a boundary within me that was being crossed and I wasn't speaking up for or I wasn't taking action
Mhm.
on. So
Mhm.
those spaces where I was actually abandoning myself
Yeah. Yeah.
over and over again to try to make the other person happy, to try to
Mhm.
maintain the peace and avoid conflict.
Yeah. It's like, in most cases, when this type of scenario happens, it's the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
And many times when we're the one who feels that that straw is the one that broke our back, I always like to evaluate whether or not I have actually, I mean, granted, I can't always try, our responses are different, but afterwards sometimes.
Mhm.
And hopefully I can get to it in that moment is to pay attention and make sure that what I'm upset about, I had conveyed to the other person enough times that they understood my boundary.
Yeah.
And if I didn't, I need to explain to them right then and there that I don't feel seen or heard, and this is why.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
if you're unable to convey that without continuing to yell at them, a nice fun rule that my family always did when I was younger, and I still practice it today, is we all take a break and we go eat some food. And if we're still upset about it, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, we don't really talk about it again because we all realize that we were just angry.
Well,
um, but then, we'll talk about the things that brought it on
mhm.
and be like, look, it wasn't actually about the fact that you didn't unload the dishwasher. This is me in high school.
Yeah.
It was actually it was actually about this whole different thing that has been, it's really small, but I've been trying to mention it for months now, and you're not paying attention. I want to play the guitar, and you're not listening to me. I've been hinting at it, and I'm trying to tell you this or something. I just threw that in there, but it has nothing to do with that. Um, and I want to feel seen and heard by this that I've been trying to communicate with you that I don't feel like you're listening to.
Mhm. Well, one of the things I wanna touch on
Mhm.
before we get too far off is you mentioned that, like, with you and your family, you guys would take a break, which
Yes.
is great. I definitely recommend if you're gonna take a break, trying to communicate a time to touch back in,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right?
That is
Um,
beautiful.
well, because then for people who are anxiously attached, somebody being
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
"I need a break," can feel like this is never going to be spoken about again,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
then that causes more anxiety and more of them trying to push to make a thing happen and that it
Mhm.
needs to be resolved right now.
Mhm.
which if you get that in combination with somebody who is avoidantly
Avoidant.
attached, they're going to push away even
More.
harder
Mhm.
because that pull for connection can feel too overwhelming in their
Yeah.
system. But when you communicate, we're going to check back in 20 minutes,
Mhm.
right? And maybe like neither of you are ready in 20 minutes, or maybe one of you is and one of you's not. That's
Mhm.
okay. Set a new time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's a beautiful example. And my mom is definitely an avoidant attachment, and I am definitely along the lines of anxious. And that was one of the rules that we had already established when we developed this we go and eat and then we'll reconvene
Hmm.
is what made my mom most comfortable was we take the time to eat, we make sure both of us have finished eating,
Hmm.
and then I can approach her whenever I'm ready.
Yeah.
And if she says to me, I'm not 100% ready yet, I'll return.
Hmm.
And that was the agreement that we had made. And it looks different for everyone. But like Alix was saying, is having that agreement in play of when we're going to reconvene, that'll help the person like me who's the anxious avoidant who knew, I'm sorry, the anxious attachment, who was comforted by the reality of as long as I finished, we had both finished our food, I could approach whenever.
Hmm.
Sometime, I was already aware that if they're not ready, I need to still give them space, but they're gonna talk to me about it eventually. And
Well,
my
and what,
mom,
oh, go
who's
ahead.
the avoidant, had the security of knowing that she would get the space she needed to recuperate or decompress or whatever she needed to do. So she had that time and then knew I was still coming
Hmm.
and also knew that she had the freedom to say no and I would just come back later.
Now there's two more things that keep coming to me that I want to touch on.
Yes, please.
Um, if like if when you're in those spaces where you're noticing like you're having this overwhelm of wanting to run, like that's it's pretty much feeling the overwhelm of anger because you can feel anger on nuanced levels
Levels.
and not have it be something that feels all consuming,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
But if you have it showing up on the very high levels, and let's say for fight, and like you try to go back after 20 minutes, you start talking, and within 5 minutes, like you feel like a volcano again,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot of value in allowing that energy to move through your body,
Yes.
right? And to express that. That doesn't mean you're taking it out on the other person.
Mhm.
What you can do though is like if you have a punching bag, and specifically if you're in fight, and you're going to have to feel into your own body for what your body is wanting to do in that moment. But like if you're wanting to punch, if you're wanting to kick, if you're wanting to scream, like go take it out on a punching bag. Go
Yeah.
pile a bunch of pillows and blankets on your bed
Yeah.
and like lock the door if you need to. Tell your partner, look, like I need to just let this energy move. Like you may hear some
Mhm.
things, like please don't take it personally. I need to let it move. You can even do that with your kids, right?
Mhm.
Allowing them the space to know that they can go take space to let that energy move is important.
Yes.
And I can guarantee you, if you have kids, there is some point in time where you will feel triggered as fuck by them. I do all the time by my son, but you use tools so hopefully you're not passing on those unhealthy behaviors to
Yeah.
them, right? At
Yeah.
least that is my perspective on
No, I
parenting.
completely agree. The only thing I'm going to add on to that is, if you are, in this, the children, inviting your children to practice this, there is an innumerable amount of ways that you can go about releasing yours. My specific
Mhm,
ones are I like to scream in my car when I'm driving by myself, and I like to go swimming.
mhm,
that is not a finite. There's not only two ways. There's hundreds of thousands of different
Oh, yeah.
ways. So allowing yourself or your children to figure out their own is really
Mhm.
important. Just because you have your specific ways that work wonderfully for you, it could be traumatizing for you to force that on someone else.
Yeah, and it's with the kids, like, and modeling that, one, it's being really clear, like, in my experience, that this thing isn't about them,
Yeah.
right? It's communicating to them that this is something arising in you, and you need to let this energy move. You're not taking it out on them, right? Like, if you
Mhm.
need to and you don't wanna, like, verbalize your anger in the way of words to where they understand what those things are, right?
Mhm.
Growl, grunt, screech, like, do
Yeah.
all the, primal noises. Um, the other one I was gonna say is, like, if you're in like, you notice, like, your system's just wanting to run, like, your legs are aching, run. Or lay on the floor and, like, bicycle your legs or push them against something so you can feel the power in your legs, right? If you're
Mhm.
in freeze, I personally like, there's a lot of ways, like Rachel Rose was saying, to go about these things, giving
Mhm.
yourself a hot bath,
Yeah, I love those.
right?
Oh, man.
Allowing yourself a more soothing space to drop into your body and reestablish that, like, these emotions and these feelings are valid, that
Mhm.
they can come up, that you can allow that energy to move and be safe in doing that, because there is so much stigma in our society, especially around being with your emotions and that being some sort of weakness.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
will
Sorry.
definitely say that through my own journey, like, I definitely was one of those people who thought being with my emotions was a weakness.
Mhm.
It is still hard for me to cry at times. It is still hard for me to tap into my anger at times, even though I've been doing this work since 2017, right? But in that, the more I bring them presence, the easier they are to be with, and the more nuanced levels I notice them on.
Mhm.
And the more strength I see that it actually takes to be with them versus pushing them away and saying I need to be something else. It
Mhm.
takes immense strength to be with your experience, to be with your emotions.
Mhm.
And I think that is one of those stigmas that has gotten carried down in our society and touted as, like, the only way it is that emotions are a weakness, and they're not at
Mhm.
all. They carry
Mhm.
immense wisdom.
Mhm. And another, like, phrasing of what you just said, just for anyone who is, like, thrown off by, like, being with your emotions, you could phrase it as taking back your power.
Mhm,
'Cause one of the reasons why swimming, and I used to do martial arts, and I stopped, not because I didn't want to do it anymore, but for financial reasons at the time, and then I just never got back into it because I found swimming. Um, when I get into a trauma triggered state, or, a panic, or I'm having high anxiety, or I had an argument, whatever reason that's coming up for me that doesn't allow, or that makes me feel unsafe, I don't feel grounded and I feel like I'm floating. And so swimming works as a power gain, a reclaiming of my power,
mhm,
because I'm floating in water, but I'm taking control of my autonomy within the water. And I am moving myself forward, back, left, or right, however I want to swim. And in those moments that I'm having high panic or high anxiety or whatever emotions that I'm not feeling in control of, by sitting with it, like Alex said, and it's a process that allows you to reclaim your control or your power. So that's a basically exactly what Alex just said, just in a different wording that might be uh, another way that people would like to hear it.
mhm.
And the same goes for yelling.
Yeah.
When I don't feel heard, I yell louder in my car.
Well, and it's getting getting through those layers
Mhm.
on the top surface to the more tender parts underneath, and that's where I love, um, internal family systems work or aspecting processes,
Mhm.
because especially in our relationships, we will get these glaring reflections of the worlds around us, and there's actually one of the episodes coming up in the next month that I came up with for my topic, and it is called Breaking Mirrors. And it is literally around noticing those projections, whether they're things that we consider positive or negative.
Mhm.
But we will tend to be subconsciously drawn to these narratives showing up in other people
Mm.
because our systems want to find balance. Our bodies want to find healing. Like our bodies are actually really amazing healers. I actually had a conversation with a potential client the other day, and he was like, "Well, I just don't want you telling me like you can fix me in X number of sessions and all these things." And I wrote him an email back because it was I offer being able to answer some questions ahead of our actual discovery calls.
Mhm.
And I told him, I was like, "Look, I will never tell you I can fix you. I will never tell you that I'm going to heal you. What I can tell you is I'm going to act like a guide,
Mhm.
right? But I also look at doctors as a guide. Like you break your arm and you go into the doctor to have it reset and casted, that doctor isn't healing your body. He is guiding the bone back to where it can set back together and fuse correctly, right? But he's not the actual one healing your body. Your body is doing that work."
Yeah. Can I throw in a little bit something
Oh,
there?
yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Keep in mind he's not your body could have healed without the doctor. If it's a broken bone, you're not,
Mhm,
depending on the circumstance, let's say it's not you just snapped it. Your body could heal itself back together, but the doctor is doing it in a way that will best serve you in your future. It's a lot like when birds break their wings and heal out in the wild, they can't fly anymore. And a lot, if the the vet thinks they could handle it, they'll re-break the wing and
mhm.
position it so that it heals properly.
Yeah,
And then that bird can fly again. So going to the doctor right away after you break your arm and having them position it, you'll heal within 6 months, and that won't affect you.
mhm,
But if you wait and you allow your body to heal to the point where your doctor would have to re-break it, that's re-traumatizing yourself, having to go through all of that healing again, and it's going to take a lot longer, and it's going to cause a lot more emotional duress and
mhm.
financial stress. Um, so it's not just like Alix was saying, it's not just we're fixing you, we're guiding you, and we're making sure that the way that we're guiding you gets you there faster and stronger.
Well, and I also love that idea of being a guide, right?
Mhm.
More
Mhm.
than the person who's healing anyone else, like, because it's not like I carry my own power, right?
Yeah.
But so does everyone else. And everyone else has their own like phenomenal ability without them even necessarily thinking about it, where their system is trying to find healing.
Mhm.
And like in my own path, I had the more minute traumas early on in childhood, right?
Mhm.
And then because my system was trying to find healing, I kept being drawn to certain types of partners
Mhm.
over and over and over again. The thing I found interesting was, especially by the end of my marriage,
Mhm.
It had felt like that partner was a 10 times reflection of all the toxic relationship dynamics that I had experienced over my life so far.
Mm, mhm.
And in that, it was kind of like this instance of like, well, let's say I broke a bone. Well, I didn't have anybody help guide me in that. I wasn't able to guide myself, and I wasn't letting it fully heal before now I was exposing it to another similar type of trauma, which felt even worse, right? Because my body was trying to find healing in that place, but there wasn't the alignment for it to heal as something even stronger. Because when a bone heals and heals properly after a break, in that area, it's actually stronger than it ever
Stronger.
was in the
Yeah,
past.
exactly.
Um, that's one of my, I worked with a trauma coach for myself for a while, Corey Scott, phenomenal coach. And she lives in a region of the United States where ginseng grows naturally,
Mm.
right? And ginseng is very valuable
Yeah.
as a root and for its medicinal purposes. And
Mhm.
so there was a point in time because it grows naturally there, a bunch of farmers was like, "Oh, we'll farm it, right? We can grow it under perfect conditions and we can make all this money off of it," right?
Mhm.
Well, what they ended up finding after, because I think it takes a couple years, few years to grow the root to the point where it can be harvested, if I remember right.
I
Um,
wasn't aware. Yeah.
she was saying that the medicinal purposes in the perfectly maintained ginseng root were actually significantly lower than the things that were growing in the wilds.
Oh, yeah.
The things in the wild, the way they were growing, like they'd have to deal with traumas. They'd have to deal with stressors. Like they may have been
Resiliency.
shaded by a tree their whole life and then the tree falls over so it no longer has that protection and it adds to the medicinal healing properties,
Potency, yeah.
right? And so the thing that's growing in the wild, the thing that goes through the trauma, when it's allowed to bloom and grow, right?
Mhm.
Not under perfect conditions, it comes out even stronger and even more potent in its healing.
I love that. Exactly.
Mhm. And
Just
so,
go
like,
back to the
that's
basics sometimes.
well, and that's
It is
there
that
can
simple.
well, and there can be this huge gift. Like, it can be scary once you start recognizing that you have trauma. It can feel really overwhelming. I'm gonna tell you, I don't think I've ever met anyone who does not have trauma because trauma is subjective.
Yep. Yeah.
But in that, like your trauma and being able to heal through that,
Mhm.
gain whatever the valuable messaging is for you, it carries so much medicine and not just for you,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure I know that's one of the reasons I ended up on this path. I didn't even know what a coach was when I went through coaching programs. I was just like, "Oh, I get 12 weeks of intensive self-work. Oh, wait, it was a whole year." Right?
Yep.
I
I know
mean,
exactly what that is.
from
Same.
from our
Same.
past work together and conversations, I have no doubt that your trauma has led to you being this type of phenomenal healer that you are.
Mhm. Exactly.
And
Thank
so there's this honoring that comes from the chaos,
mm.
that comes from the disarray and the hurt and the pain,
Mhm.
where it also can carry immense value.
Yeah. And I do wanna I wanna say, like, that should be commended, and the strength that is developed through that should be commended. I don't know
Mhm.
if you'd use the word should. because I use it again, but for lack of a better one, that's the one we're using. Um, that's not to say that once you get older and you start recognizing those traumas that you had, that you got yourself through, that you've done your damn best, and I'm sure you did, to seek out help now. It won't dilute the potency, like you were saying. You'll still be healing in the wild.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
not going to be going to farming where you're diluting the potency and the power and the remedy.
Yeah. Not at all.
And I just wanted to remind that before anyone came to weird conclusions within themselves.
I appreciate. No, and I've heard conflicting statements around this, but when I heard it initially, I was like, that is really, really beautiful, right?
Right?
And it applies to shamanic practitioners, and specifically like shamanic practitioners of old,
Mm,
right? Older past generations. But the concept I ended up hearing around that is a lot of the time the people who would end up going through the initiations, I
mhm,
guess is a good word, were those who had gone through bigger, traumatic, chaotic life experiences.
mhm.
So maybe that was somebody who went through the loss of their whole family, right? Maybe that was somebody who had schizophrenia, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who had all these other bigger instances that gave them a different perspective. And they would become the shamans and the healers in that they had a guide,
Yeah.
right? They had an older shaman who had wisdom, who had been through that sort of journey to
Mhm.
help them move through the proverbial cave.
Yes. It's like a wizard doesn't become a wizard without being an apprentice first. And then once
Hmm.
becoming a master wizard, they get an apprentice.
Yeah, yeah, and that's even as that person is the master, part of that mastery is also recognizing that you're still learning all along the
Mhm.
way. And that's one of the
Mhm.
kind of like hurdles I've noticed, whether it's people in the recovery community, people going through the beginnings of spiritual journeys, where they're like, well, I know all this, right? They get
Yeah.
this overconfidence, and then it's kind of at some point, them falling off the pedestal because they're like, oh, wait, there's more to learn.
Yep.
I don't remember. I think it's like a Buddhist quote. Um, like a wise man is one who's able to admit how much he doesn't know.
I remember that in myself. When I
Mm,
graduated college, I had, there was a very difficult time for me. I was 2 years at that point, almost a year and a half, really, in remission from cancer. And I had graduated. I had this job lined up in South Korea that I had to wait a couple of months for. And I was just like, I know everything. I'm the best. I'm fine. And I had 6 months to wait. So I had 6 months of being on this pedestal that I put myself on. And I laugh at myself because the minute that I went actually out into the world after that on my own, without protection of my parents or friends or anything that I had learned to have conquered, I realized how much I didn't know and how
mm,
small I was in comparison to how much I didn't know. And I still crack myself up because I remember myself and how cocky I was.
yeah.
And my dad still makes fun of me for that to this day, and I don't blame him.
Well, and I think the other way this can show up really prominently around this idea of trauma triggers,
Mm,
right? Is
mhm.
let's say you get to whatever your trauma trigger is at its rock bottom. So now it's the big volcano erupting,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
To where you're noticing this pattern is no longer serving me. Like I'm noticing this belief. And you work through it and you do a lot of work through it and you do a lot of healing through it.
Mhm.
There can be that like feeling of like, oh, I took one step forward and two steps back when that comes up again. But
Mhm.
I can tell you when you've done those initial phases of healing, it's kind of like going in rather than a downward spiral to the bottom of the pit,
Mhm.
moving through an upward spiral. You're gonna come across those things again, but at a more nuanced level for you
Mhm.
to recognize it, right? And
Yeah.
eventually you end up climbing your way out of that hole, but it doesn't mean you're not going to come across the same type of rock formations as coming to mind for whatever reason.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Again, so like give yourself grace and compassion in that and
Mhm.
realize when it's coming back up, there's a little bit more of something for you to learn here, for you to connect with here,
Mhm.
versus staying in the, well, I already learned this, I already know this, I don't need to look at it again. Because to me, if you do that, the I already learned this, I already know this, it's going to be more likely you're going to slip. And now it's not just that two-step back feeling, it feels like you hit the bottom of the pit again.
Mhm. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
The best visual example I have of what Alix was just saying is the lotus flower. Now, the lotus flower is grown in water, so you can't really like dig a hole and put the seed in. You kind of just toss it into the water. And then it has to go down from that water, hit all the things along the way to get into the water. Then it has to have time and pressure to get in under the muck and dirt that's there so that it can root. And then it spends all of its time working its way back up to the surface. This is a lot like the life path and the healing path. It's known as a chthonic fall. I think I've mentioned it before.
Mm-hmm.
And remembering that it's part of the path makes it so much lighter. I'm not going to say easier because it's not easy, but it lightens the load that you're carrying on this path to work through all of that muck. The muck is important to become a lotus flower up on the top of water. But also remember the impermanence of the cycles in the seasons, which is why I laugh at my young version of myself that, went through all of that transformation and, was blooming. And I forgot that winter comes and that is not everything.
Yeah.
And that I need to do all of that again. Oh, shit. And that is the cycle of life. It's the circle of life. Yes. So I will leave that there
Yeah.
before I go on another tangent. I am sure I will. Is there anything that you would like to say more before I head
um,
off?
so I think I'm going to talk just a little bit about a few different resourcing practices for if people are noticing they're
Mm,
trauma triggered,
mm, mhm.
um, just to help bring them back to that space of safety. And then I will end
Beautiful.
up hopping off as well. I know it's 2 o'clock, so thank you for joining me again today. And
Thank
I
you for
thoroughly look
having me.
forward to our
Next
call
week?
next
Yeah.
week, which is Unbound for the topic. Trying to, yeah, we'll just call it Unbound because I can't remember
The
the
rest of
phrasing
it.
that came
That is
after. Yeah.
A-okay. We'll have postings of that soon as well, everybody.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rachelrose.
Thank you. I will talk to you next week.
All right. Have a
Bye,
great day.
everybody. Bye.
All right. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about some things you can do in the moment for helping bring yourself back to this grounded state. We talked a little bit through this session about how you can, if you're in a conflict with somebody, you can take a step away. If you're noticing an inner conflict coming up for yourself, you can also do the same thing. Go take a walk out in nature, right? Um, you can go sit in front of the TV. I really recommend doing things that feel pleasurable and soothing in your system. You're trying to bring yourself back to feelings of safety. And the more you do this, the more you build trust in your system that you can provide that safety, you can provide that care, and it makes it easier and easier to notice that safety exists within you. Another thing you can do is, again, making sure physically you are in a safe space. Like if you have somebody chasing you down, obviously, like you're in the middle of an active fear, fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, then that's not the best place to do it. But if you can go put yourself in your bedroom, lock the door if you need to, right? Go step outside, but look around your immediate space and just really fine tune focus visually on 5 different objects around you, noticing their color. You can also do this with any of the other senses. So, one of the things I'll tend to do, and I've mentioned it before, is noticing the way the air currents in the room feel on my skin. Like, do I notice a difference in temperature? How fast are those air currents moving over my skin? Is there a difference in the speed on what I'm noticing on my arms versus what I'm noticing on my legs? Um, Another thing I'll tend to do is I will actually take my fingers or nails and run them across my skin. It's bringing presence to this moment because a lot of the time when trauma triggers come up, it can be these floods and flashbacks of memories in our body, whether that is you're getting visual floods of images coming up, floods of thoughts coming up. It can be floods of emotions arising. And it's those feelings of overwhelm or disconnection where you can't feel your body at all. You're very much so in your head, or this idea of being out of your body, and bringing yourself back to this grounded space and bringing yourself personal care. Maybe that's you take a hot bath, right? We had mentioned before doing the exercises with punching pillows, going for a run. Rachelrose had mentioned swimming. The important thing here, especially if you are feeling dissociated and that out of body feeling, is bringing presence to your body. So when you're punching, really bring fine tuned focus to the strength in your arm while you're punching a pile of pillows. And I'm always going to recommend have it be a soft surface you're punching, right? I know plenty of men who they get mad and they punch a wall and they break their hand, they break other things. My core foundation is safety in anything I do with clients. I don't want you hurting somebody else or hurting your own body. If you really feel the desire to break something, you can go to a rage room, right? You can set up your own rage room in a garage. Take into mind some safety precautions, safety glasses so you're not getting shards of things splashing back in your face, right? In your eyes, things like that. Um, and that's you can think about these things before your actual triggers ever come up. And maybe what you think will be helpful in that moment won't actually be, but at least you have a safety plan for yourself and creating a plan of action, or maybe a couple different routes. So maybe your route is different if you're in a fight response compared to if you're in a flee response versus if you're in freeze versus if you're in fawn, which fawn is that space of please and appease of another person. So for me, this showed up as giving a yes to avoid conflict when it was really a no in my body. But there's different routes, and giving it this conscious attention beforehand can be really, really valuable. And then once you notice this has been triggered in your system, you can default to, okay, this is coming up. I know how I can handle it. I know I can go for a walk. I can focus on looking at the leaves. I can smell a flower. I can feel the sun on my skin or the rain on my skin or the breeze or the snow, whatever it is. But you're bringing it back to focused attention in the present moment. I want to thank anyone who's listening in this moment or anytime in the future for joining us here. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment, because I can guarantee if you are having that question, somebody else is as well. And being willing to show up for yourself with your curiosities is so valuable, so that you can learn, you can grow, and you can expand. Another thing I want to offer is through the link or my link tree, you can find a sign up for the Sexient Beings email list. I have a great safety practice that I actually just recorded last night for a dear friend, but it's around building a safe container in your body. And the thing you can do with this is you listen to it a few times, you get used to working with this flow of the breath, with noticing energy in your body and cycling it to create kind of a cocoon of safety within your being. And the more used to that you get, the less time it'll take for you to actually connect with it. So, where the actual recording is about a 15-minute practice, as you become more comfortable with it, as you recall the steps, you can actually do this in a couple minutes to drop into your body and bring that presence and bring that feeling of safety. Or you can do it while you're walking down the street. You can do it without having to consciously think about it, but it takes practice. It's not necessarily a skill that you were taught and had developed through your life. It may be something that you've done on a unconscious level, and that's beautiful. Like, that is your own body's wisdom showing up. But in that, it's a skill you're building. So as you're going through any of this healing journey, any sort of self work, realize you are learning new sets of skills, and to have grace with yourself in that. And the thing I can guarantee you is it may have taken you a long time to get to the point where you are now working at learning these new skills. And it may feel like it's taking a long time to develop and learn these new skills. But I can guarantee you it's going to take you far less time to learn these new skills and become really masterful in them than it did for you to get to the point where you realized those old things weren't serving you. So I wish you the best for today. You can find links for both Rachelrose and my groups and social media under the About section and under this post in the information. And I so look forward to seeing any comments, any feedback, whatever it is. Like, we would love to hear your stories, your experiences. Have a great day.